I want to talk about what I'm calling the principal's office interviews that we have seen of some of the players from Carlton. And I want to first take a look at the principal's office interview of Daddy Voss, Michael Voss, because I am kind of reading a little bit into the way that he spoke, into his energy, into where he's at in his life, and I wanted to share that with you. So firstly, he is somebody who does move from a very emotional place. And now that is not going to show, that's not going to be at the forefront of what we see him acting from. We see him acting from a very stable position, from a very boss energy, from a very masculine energy. But his rule structure, the way that he moves in the world, the way that his ego presents itself, is at the mercy of his emotional state. This is somebody who doesn't like to have the emotions, somebody who would rather rush through them and not sit with them, somebody who doesn't want to be curious in any depth about their emotional state. He, once he thinks he knows something, that's it, and on we go. And there's like that secretive kind of emotional language that he would have learned growing up from a father figure, from all of the men around him, that kind of energy that a lot of men born in this generation have of be a man, don't completely show your feelings. Now, part of him is very good at understanding feelings, very good at communicating from that place, very good at using a soft communication tone, like a kind father, discipline kind of energy, where there is a respect, knowing, that he has a shadow side, that he has a dark side, that he can explode if he wants to, but that he's choosing to be in control. And he is somebody who needs to be the boss in order to get the most joy out of relationship dynamics. Very stubborn, very stable, and very sure of how he thinks masculine energy needs to show up. All right. And there is a deep stubbornness there that potentially holds him back from being able to see that other people may need to show up differently, may need to show up in a different masculine energy, right? His belief structure is very stubborn, very based on how he grew up. And there is a slight inability to see that might need to change. Now, the upside of, the map of Daddy Voss's psyche is that he has this kind of luck energy where anything that he wants to achieve, he has the ability to take as many risks as he needs in order to get there, and very likely will get there. So even though as he, we see him trying to make changes, he has to kind of overthink them. He has to over-research them. He has to try everything. He has to know all of the pieces of the puzzle. And we can see that that's kind of the way the year has played out. We had all of these things going really well, and then all of a sudden we started to see all of these small changes happening. All of these, like, maybe we'll try this, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. And that is because he needs all of the pieces of the information in order to adapt, in order to change something, because the underlying emotional control that builds who he is, how he shows up, how he moves through the world, and his general philosophy of life being run by his emotional state. To cancel that out, to feel comfortable making change, he needs to be sure that he has all of the information. Unfortunately, when it comes to AFL, we are on a very strict timeline. So we as fans see the whole year as the timeline, and this is somebody who has to stretch that timeline out to a much bigger picture because they need all of the information. And being this kind of stubborn energy, this stubborn leadership that is not very open to seeing how other people need to show up, we can see this kind of growing animosity, this growing frustration happening of people wanting to be themselves and show up in their own way, but sort of being asked to slow down and let him gather his information. Now, the way that he spoke in his principal's office interview is very interesting to me because it's very controlled and it's very misleading. Now, there is a reason for that. The way that he communicates, he is able to use words to manipulate situations and ideas. This is somebody who can convince anybody to do anything they want. This is the energy of being caught in a web and going along with something because the person talking to you seems very stable, seems very sure, seems to have a lot of information, and you go along with it and you do what he says and you do what he says. And then later on that night, when you're sitting alone, away from his energy, away from the optimism that he brought to that situation, you start questioning whether or not you were showing up in your authenticity, whether you did something you didn't want to do, whether you believed something you didn't truly believe. And that is the power of the way that Michael Voss's communication works. Now, because he comes across in this very emotionally stable kind of energy, it makes him even more convincing. And because he has this ability to achieve the goal that seems ridiculous, we keep saying, oh, he told me to do that thing. I did it. It didn't quite work out for me, but here we are having achieved the goal. And it doesn't allow as much conversation to be had in that moment. And I think this is very interesting because Vossi has this wound of identity. And he is somebody, particularly because of the mother energies around him when he was growing up, that were very hot and cold, very fast kind of energy, very hard to kind of pinpoint. He has learned from that there are parts of him that he shouldn't show people, and it has given him this wound of identity. And that's kind of how we see him, through this very controlled projection of who he wants you to believe his identity is. Now, his greatest purpose here is to transform from somebody who has the finer things in life, the external presentation of success, into somebody who has a depth of understanding, somebody who invests time in getting to know themselves, somebody very comfortable in their shadow. Now, with this wound of self, it gives this kind of lifelong journey of having to question whether or not you are showing up correctly. And this part of the journey that he's in right now is asking him to find an honesty with his relationships. And I think we are seeing a push and pull dynamic of that as he works through this issue. And, I think sometimes we get the Vossi that is being authentic. And I think sometimes we get the Vossi that is wearing this very controlled, very put together mask because he is trying to convince us of something that he knows we won't quite sit with, that he knows he needs to use a little bit of that manipulation magic in order to convince us that what he's doing is correct. Now, this is particularly interesting because part of the cycle that he is opening up for the next couple of years really involves how those slightly dishonest projections of who he thinks he is, how those things are going to physically manifest, how we are going to be able to see those things through his physical behavior. So he's entering a very interesting couple of years where he is going to have to start looking at this wound of identity and start finding this balance with who he truly is and how he truly presents that. And I think you can see this dynamic really having an effect on the team, where we see sometimes they're very put together, sometimes they're not. And that is this push-pull kind of energy that he has with himself. Now, we will start to see, I think, over the next month, a little bit of truth of what has actually been going on in some of the conversations with him. And I think one in particular that I will talk about in another video is Cripps, his energy around how he talks about Voss and his interesting language choices about that. So I think the principal's office interview for Voss was a very controlled, very specifically chosen way of talking, choice of words that allowed him to feel in control and try and convince us that what he was saying was all that we needed to hear, that we didn't need to look deeper, that we didn't need to look further into the shadow. But we are in an energy right now that is revealing shadows, that is revealing secrets. And so let's see what comes out over the next few months as we close out a huge part of energy over the last couple of years that is seriously activating Daddy Voss in his identity wound. Thanks for joining me. Stay weird.